unknown depths, skirting shores thinking world flat. I'm with the island girls in celebration of new religion. Nobody led me or said this way. I sailed alone on makeshift raft with wind as companion. Faith for deliverance, confidence enough to assess new disposition. Seekers of lost paradise may seem fools to those who never sought the other world. Welcome to Momentary Zen with Zen Garcia. Visit www.fallenangels.tv. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Hello and welcome everybody. It's great to be with you all tonight here on Momentary Zen on Revolution Radio. I welcome everybody joining on Revolution Radio over at Freedom Slips, and also everybody joining the live stream over at youtube.com/Garcia. Tonight, I am joined by author and researcher Gary Wayne to continue the Ask Me Anything series. This will be episode 50. And like always, we have a pre-made list of 14 questions, and we will be taking questions from the live chat over here on the YouTube live stream to add to the list, hopefully to get to tonight. But if we don't get to your question tonight, we will roll it over to become the pre-made list on next month's Ask Me Anything. And without further ado, let's welcome our guest for tonight. Brother Gary? Yes, me too. And I apologize over on the YouTube live stream. For some reason, I had a weird disconnect for a second. I'm not sure what was going on, if that was YouTube checking in to see if we were staying within their censorship limitations, but here we are back with some good connectivity. So yeah, welcome Brother Gary. We're really excited to be able to present you these awesome questions. I feel like the questions are always really, really interesting on your Ask Me Anythings. I love the prophecy questions, and I added a little question of my own there as number 14 for tonight. So I'm excited to get to that one. So before we do that, can we get a little update on how is your second book coming, the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2?
Progressing. I got a note from the publisher today, and I read it, and I'm going to be receiving the typeset copy now. So it's gone through the regular editing process, it's gone through the high-tech editing process, and I had to edit also both of those, and then the typeset, which goes into the actual printing of the book. I'll be reviewing that and seeing whether or not we missed anything or there was anything that was altered on the last document that I saw. So it's a process that is designed to deliver a good product, but it is tedious at times. But it is moving along, and we're looking for November or October, depending on how fast I can turn around the typeset, and I think I'll be able to do that next week. So
awesome! I'm really glad to hear the update of that. We're really excited to continue our study into the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, of course, Part 2. This is going to be a really exciting time for all of those who love to binge read all of your work. And it is really well put together information, as I like to say, the treasure trove of awesome conspiracy material, and also, founded in what I would call conspiracy reality, because it is based on biblical truths and historical truths that seem to coincide with what the Bible states, believe it or not. So let's go ahead and jump over into the questions for tonight. Yes, as Tammy said in the chat, thank you, Tammy, for joining us as moderator and for all that you do. Welcome. Also, Barbie George, thank you for your help. And welcome to everybody that is joining. I do have some awesome questions so far. The Matrix Squared, MJM, and yep, I see a few questions there in the chat. Please make sure you do put question in all caps at the beginning of your question, so I know that that is one for Gary, and I will add that to the list. All right, let's jump over here into the questions. And the first one for tonight comes from Daniel Sullivan. Does Luke 17:30 through 31 place the revelation of the Son of Man, the rapture, to just after the midpoint of tribulation, with a reference to not coming down from the rooftops, as in Matthew 24:18 through 19?
Yeah, very, very good question. And the first answer is yes and no, because Daniel is on the right track here. So, what's interesting about the three different accounts of the Gospels is that they are essentially the same. They all support each other, but you have to link them together. And I like to start with Matthew first and then link the other ones on top. And Matthew gives us a very, very good chronological order. We know that it's in a chronological order of the sequence of events for the signs for the end time and is coming, because Jesus uses the word tota, and it's used in all three of the Gospels in this account. And it means then and at that time. So it is a specific word that is used so that you know that each of the events are following in a linear sort of fashion. And it's very, very important to understand that so that you can not only link Matthew up with Mark, which is almost identical with just a few additional details, but Luke is split up into chapter 17 and 21. So you have to link that in together and then over to Matthew. And also noting that you can also do this with Revelation, as what we talked about at the prophecy conference in Atlanta, and understanding that Revelation is the testimony of Jesus that was provided to John through the angel that was sent for the visions. So it ought to match perfectly, and it does. So what Daniel is talking about is essentially correct, but there are two events that are going on here, and we need to sort of separate that. So in Matthew 24, and he has 18 and 19, this is not a passage of the rapture, but it's in the same sort of time frame. So in Matthew 24, 18 and 19, and it begins in 15, this is the time of the abomination at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And it's a time when Judea is going to flee to the mountains. And that is a parallel passage for Revelation 12, which is showing 3.5 years that Judah will be protected, and a parallel passage for pretty much an identical accounting in Mark 13 and in Luke 21, verses 17, that Daniel is talking about. This is the time specifically that Judah is going to flee to the mountains for safety, and it starts to mark the time of Jacob's trouble for the great tribulation being Philipses, and Jacob's trouble being Sarah. They mean exactly the same thing, and they're designed for the last 3.5 years. And again, it's a part of the visitations of Jesus. So there's a nuance in here, though, as you get into Matthew 24. And I'll link that back to Luke 17 in a second. You are getting in Matthew 24, 36 to 44, and starting in Matthew 24, 30, you get the sign in Matthew's 30 of the sign, and then you get the fig tree generation, that all of the events that he had described before would happen. And then he moves into Matthew 24, 36, where he's talking about a specific hour of his coming. Nobody knows. And then it gets into the rapture verses. So it's after the abomination. So in those passages in Matthew 24, 36 through 44, you get the same type of accountings beginning in verse 40, where there's two in a field that will be taken. One will be taken, one will be left. And giving examples of people being taken and people being left. And so you move over to Luke 17 now, to what Daniel was talking about in verses 30 to 31. You have starting in verse 30, it says that, this will be the day when the Son of Man is revealed. And again, it is following the fig tree, and in Luke, you have the Sodom and Gomorrah overlay as well, connecting the destruction of fire for the end time. Then it goes into the day of the Son of Man is being revealed, and you get the exact same type of wording that's going on, that in that day, there's going to be people up on the housetop. So there's going to be an anticipation. You know what's going on with the abomination. Judah knows what they're going to be doing, and Christians are going to be recognizing this as well. And we're told to be aware of this hour. And that passage from Luke 17:30 to 37 is essentially the same description as in Matthew 24:36 to 44 with Jesus is coming. And in Matthew 24:30, that's where you also have Jesus' sign and his coming as well. So it does match up. You got those two different events. So the thing that I would just sort of advise prophecy students is don't conflate two different issues. They may be happening at the same time, but just understand that you have the abomination, Judea fleeing, and then you also have that following that, the time of the rapture. So very, very close, as I said, to what Daniel was talking about. And he has, I think, in my understanding of prophecy, and I know there's a lot of people who differ with me on this in terms of the timing, that fits perfectly, and there is no conflict whatsoever in those details. Just don't confuse the time of the abomination that's clearly described in Mark 13 and Luke 21 and Matthew 24:15 to 20 with the sign of Jesus is coming, and then the day of the Lord, as it's described in those passages that follow. And if you use that Matthew template and then insert those identical details over onto Matthew 24:30, it takes away the confusions. Are they the same issues? Are they the same timing? Yes. Are they exactly the same events? No. But you'll see that when you lay them on top of each other. And that's, like I say, that's my approach. And I find that it works with me, and I don't have to worry about where do different passages fit, whether or not it's in Revelation, anywhere else in the New Testament, or anywhere else in the Old Testament.
Excellent. Well, I love the consistency there. Thank you for that answer. We'll move on to the next question that comes from Donna Smith. Question: how do we explain aliens / Nephilim as believers? And if it were to show up, could we rebuke them away? Are they shapeshifters or hybrids as mixed flesh, or both?
Yeah, very, very good question. And just before I answer that, I realized I should have connected something else in, because I did sort of throw Revelation in on that's the testimony of Jesus. So in Matthew 24:44, where it talks about the hour that nobody knows, and again, you get that same wording that comes up in Luke and in Matthew. That's the hour of temptation, or the hour of trial that happens in the early part of Revelation that we will be saved from. And this is the hour of the two witnesses being killed in the second woe that begins the seventh trumpet in Revelation 11. And again, so we're pointing towards the midpoint here, and it's the same hour that the 10 kings pass their power over to Antichrist at the midpoint of the last 7 years. And it's the same hour of the destruction, as the wording is also used in Revelation 14 for the destruction of Babylon, as it starts the summary of the last 3.5 years, and then for the woes of Babylon that is described in Revelation 18, that is destroyed in an hour. And of course, you have alas, 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 or woe, 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 depending on which translation you are, which is, I think, is the final part of the third woe. Just as you also have, as part of that third woe, you have the woe in Revelation 12, which we talked about as being the midpoint of the last 7 years when there's the war in heaven and Judah is fleeing and will be protected for 3.5 years. So the language is just amazing how it comes together and the chronology, how it fits together. So just thought I'd throw that back in, and not to dismiss Donna's question or to avoid it, even though it's a very, very good question and a difficult question, and I think, there's a lot of things in the Bible that are difficult to explain, and I think we ought not to be sort of pre-positioning ourselves with doubt or concern in terms of how we want to explain it. We want to be familiar with the topic, but we want to be comfortable with the fact that the Bible is the most preternatural book in the world, and we ought not to run away from any passages, and I'm not suggesting Donna is. I just like that sort of pre-positioning as we answer particularly difficult questions, because there are things that go on in this world that nobody understands unless you're very, very sound in the Bible. And there will be things that, even Bible experts won't know, but at least we're getting a basis for an understanding that we can watch and develop as we go. So aliens, how do we explain aliens and Nephilim? So there's two different things to explain there. And let's start with the aliens first, because I think this will be something you can build on to explain the Nephilim. So when we look at the word alien, that means sort of alien to our planet, not natural to our planet. And so whatever the being is, however you want to describe them, it is beings that aren't earth-born, aren't earth natural. And there is either something as a intercession or something that is foreign, and or both. So if we look at fallen angels, these are aliens. They're just very powerful aliens. And they have a changeling capacity. And these are the people that run the earth. And they have the ability to not only change into whatever body or gender that they choose, they have the ability to go back between dimensions. And this body of fallen angels created a council of gods that Satan sits over that runs this world even to this day. So it suggests rank and order, and they have a rebellious heavenly host, and that's the Hebrew word Saba, rank and order. So it's like an army of rebellious angels and an army, conversely, of loyal angels that God has. And they all have specific roles to do, and they can all shapeshift, and they need to shapeshift to take a body in the physical world. They can be here in a spiritual sense, and as spirit beings, which they are, but they have the ability to create their own oiketerion, their own dwelling place. And we know this because it shows up in the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative as the most obvious, where you have the pre-existent Jesus and two angels that aren't recognized at first as angels, but they eat and they drink and they physically interact and they talk and they do everything that men can, and they're actually called men. And then these are the same two that are talked about in the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative. And we're also told in the book of Hebrews that we ought to be good to strangers, because you never know when you might run across an angel, which again implies that they would have the ability to take a physical body. And that's how they would pass on their DNA with that oiketerion. And again, a lot of this is building blocks for the Nephilim answer, but we're still dealing with the alien sort of aspect. Now, in the alien sort of mythos, and with the amount of sensationalism that is now going forward and the acceptance of aliens, that they're coming from other planets or through different dimensions, and I would fall in the different dimension category, that There's ability not only for the fallen angels to come through these portals, depending on whatever portal that they want to use and however they do it, and they might do it differently than the lower level of the aliens. For example, when you see in ancientology, you see an orb or a circle that has a body and a face in it, or just a face, that's usually a god being represented in that bubble. And the whole being is in the bubble, not just sort of this halo effect when I'm talking about this orb. And that's like a quantum bubble, it's thought that these gods would use to come through these portals with. And it's also an understanding that these angels, when they take a physical body, they can create physical beings. And in polytheism, we get all sorts of creatures that were produced by the rebellious gods in Greek mythology, Sumerian mythology, Egyptian mythology, all around the world. And so we now need to look biblically and explain that there's the invisible ones and there are the visible ones. Now, the fallen angels can become visible, but the visible ones that we're doing war with are their spurious offspring and the descendants of those spurious offspring. So they have ability with this body that they create to create other types of beings through procreation. One also presumes through their angelic technology. Just as you see the chariots of the gods that have this great technology, you also see images of gods in other cultures having other type of craft. And this bank of knowledge is very far advanced. And that knowledge is going to be passed on to their spurious offspring that they create through their DNA. So within this visible one hierarchy, you have the obvious ones where the sons of God go to human females and they create the Nephilim in Genesis 6:4, and then they do so again. And we see that both before and after the flood. And we see the Nephilim being described before the flood in the Rephaim, which is used 25 times in the Old Testament for giant, versus Nephilim only used 3 times. And the accounting that I would normally advise people is even the reference in number 1333 to the Anakim were giants. Nephilim was the embellished part of the evil report, and we know Anakim were recorded in the details that Caleb and Joshua set forward to the Israelites and to Moses as the 3 Anakim kings of Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. And that in Deuteronomy 2, just with like other post-Diluvian giants, that word giant, as Anakim are described of in the Emimar and the Zamzuzim and the Horim and on and on and on, that word goes back to Rephaim. Those are the post-Diluvian giants. So they were doing that to scare the people because the Nephilim were likely larger and more fearful, even though these were very large giants, as testified to by the size of Goliath and Og in the Bible. So we have these beings that are being created both before and after the flood. And it's likely the post-Diluvian giants, or somehow the antediluvian ones, survive, that are the disembodied spirits of the giants after they died. In Genesis 6:3, their life was limited to 120 years, not that they didn't have an immortal spirit. And so you have these beings that are part of the spiritual realm, they're demigods, and they're looking for a body. And they will not, we will not see them in the end time until they're inserted into some sort of clone body or something to that effect, a new oikotarian that's created, they can possess to interact, but that doesn't really have anything to do with the aliens. We'll see them as that alien coming back in these cloned bodies, and or we're going to see ones that were either saved or recreated. But the disembodied are part of this hierarchy. They're at the highest hierarchy of the rebellious visible realm. And so they were provided governorship by the fallen angels who rule from the council of the gods over humankind. And these are the royals, and these are the descendants, and they work for their gods and the divine right to rule provided to them through the Baalim, and are working with the fallen angels to bring about the end time, have been and will continue to do so. And so these are the ones that are going to be working with this alien mythos to deceive humans, that they're not really fallen angels, they're not really disembodied spirits that have somehow taken a clone body when they show up that way, and who knows, they may already have these clone bodies that they're using. But there's even more offspring. There's the little ones, and for example, there's three groups of the little ones: good-looking ones, mischievous ones, and ugly ones. And in the ugly ones, you have the grays of the gnomes, who come through portals in flying machines, spaceships, UFOs, with great angelic technology supplied to them by their masters, and they kidnap people. And I put a couple of these in my book, these encounters. If you didn't know it was a gray alien, or if you didn't know it was a fairy encounter, you would swear it was a gray alien encounter, because it's identical, and they're described identically to the grays. And so you have other groups that are part of this alien mythos as well, in terms of these three groups of the elementals that they're called. And elementals is associated in the Bible with the ruling body. And the ruling body of the visible ones. And it's also, you look at the word rudiment. So look for the application of both elemental and rudiment in terms of governorship, as opposed to elemental parts to the universe, because it's used both ways in the New Testament. But both are contributing to the hierarchical organization of the spurious ones in this physical world that report to the invisible ones, and that we fight both. So that means they've been interacting with us all the way through. They would either have been recreated after the flood, or they survived the flood. In the same way, Nephilim would show up, if there's Nephilim around, and I think we'll see some in the end time. However, they show up. And then you have a larger group that's called the salamanders, which is the fourth group of elementals. And they are larger than little ones. They are larger from humans. They're usually seen within the earth and coming through these gateways or portals again. And all of these beings are part of the alien mythos. And now you add into the aspect that you have in Revelation and in the book of Daniel, you have the number of 10,000 times 10,000 fallen angels who rebel, which would be a number of 100 million. And in other passages, the number is like uncountable, like the stars in the sky, which is another allegory for fallen angels, or for angels as a whole. And that number is either going to be a figurative number that's an incredibly big number, or it's accurate as 100 million that sit around the throne of God. And in Revelation 12, we're told a third will have rebelled. Whether or not they rebelled throughout history all at once, or by the midpoint of the last 7 years, we'll have a large number that's going to be at least 33 million or 50 million, depending on how you want to calculate a third of 100 million. It's a lot, and they all have changeling capabilities. So they can produce in mass numbers through their shape-shifting capability, because not all of the angels are in the abyss. Only the worst of the angels are in the abyss, just like only the worst of the Nephilim spirits and the terrible ones of the post-Diluvian epoch, as being the Rephaim disembodied spirits, are in the abyss. The rest are roaming the earth and the underworld. And when they go through a portal, that's going into Sheol or Hades or the other world, and when it's known by all of these different names around the earth. And that's the home of the gods. That's the heaven. That's the home of the aliens. That's where they return to. So I know that's a bit of a long answer, but I just wanted to give enough detail to sort of give you the basis to stand in there and say, we can account for what's going on with this alien thing. It just has a different reality to the propaganda that is being provided to us. And these are the relationships between the visible ones and the invisible ones. And if we approach it that way, they may still not agree with us, but they can't say that we aren't armed with information to understand what these forces are doing, and that we can lay some seeds to them that if you continue to see them going in this globalist direction with this mystical religion and universal religion concept, and if we don't come together as one, we will destroy ourselves from the face of the earth. If you see those policies being enacted, understand they're all part of the visible ones and the invisible ones that are trying to bring about the end time, because both are working in the same goal. There's just the disinformation and the propaganda that goes with it so that they can bring about the great deception.
Yeah, really interesting question. Thank you very much for that one, Donna, and thank you for that answer, Brother Gary. Our next question comes from The Matrix Squared. Question: if you add 80 years to the 1947 Israel rebirth, you get 2027. Don't end times events need to play out by then? And if not, then when?
Yeah, I kind of think where the 80 years that Matrix Squared is talking about is probably 70 years of a generation, and then if there's 10 days of tribulation that the book of Revelation talks about, then that's probably where the 80 years comes from. I'm just deducing, because typically a generation, as the book of Psalms in 90:10 would talk about, a generation is 70 years. And so I think that's where the math comes from. And we also get in the book of Exodus, and the time in the wilderness, and the time of Israel, a generation is 40 years. And you also get in Genesis 6:3, as I mentioned, is that a generation or a lifetime is 120 years. So we have to be careful with what a generation is so that we don't get trapped in our own I guess self-importance as we try and figure things out. We need to be humble as we go through it. I'm not suggesting Matrix isn't, but I'm just saying for people that we want to make sure that we're firm on what we believe, but we don't want to sort of overreach. So connecting with what I'm assuming, and I just want to underline, I'm assuming and speculating what Matrix Squared is asking, is that he's referring to the fig tree generation where all of the events will be fulfilled. And that is an ironclad doctrine for end time prophecy as Jesus laid out. Heaven and earth will fade away with a new earth being replaced, but Jesus's words will never fade away. And so there is that specific generation. So, but the first caution I would have is that we should be very careful with the size of a generation. But if that's what Matrix Squared is talking about, then 70 years would have been 2017, 10 years of tribulation. We should be through it. If that was the start of 1947 when Israel declared their independence, and that Israel is thought by many to be the start of the Israel in the covenant land, is thought to be the trigger that ticks off the fig tree generation. And if it's 120 years, it still might be. So we have to be open to that understanding as well. Or 1947 isn't the start of the end time or the fig tree generation. It may be that it's not Israel being in the covenant land. It may be a piece of it. My thoughts were all along is that Jerusalem has to be in the possession of Israel to start the fig tree generation, because Jerusalem is the epicenter of all end time prophecy. Everything is about finishing there, and it's mentioned over and over and over and over. So I always looked at it that if in my generation was there an event, that would be it, and that would be 1967. So if you put 70 years, we're past the 40 years, but we're not past the 70 years, and it still have the variable. You still have the variable of the 120 years to factor in. So I would suggest that we be a little bit more patient and not as picking which one those generations are. We're seeing, I think, the sorrows being played out, and we're still in the birth pangs. And that the birth pangs or the sorrows, as Matthew 24 and Mark talk about in the book of Luke, it includes wars and rumors of wars, pestilence, famine, and earthquakes. And we see the earthquakes getting stronger. We've seen a pestilence that was contrived. And I think these are all contrived. And all of these sorrows get stronger. And the wars and the rumors of wars, I think we're just starting to see as we see this shuffle towards the 10 kings and the 10. And I know there's a lot of different views on this. My view is that it is a contrived end time that the spurious ones are trying to bring about. So they're trying to bring about the time that's not the ordained time and before, and use that as part of the deception to fool more people. So they're the ones that are going to be causing this, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be using the geopolitical and military nature of the world to bring about the end time. And so that means 10 kings, whether it's you believe that's one country just in Europe. I believe it's 10 groups of nations around the world, and that the Club of Rome, spurious organization that reports to the Committee of 300, and the United Nations, which reports to the Committee of 300 in the Thelemic Tree, and the World Bank and the IMF and the Davos crew all believe in 10 groups of nations. They may all split them slightly a little bit differently, and the end result may be a little bit different than what they're predicting. I think they're dividing the world up into 10 empires, and it's just a matter of what that final shape looks like. But it's going to take wars to do that, and rumors of wars. So you're going to see a lot of geopolitical uneasiness that's going to have wars, and some people are going to say these are the Armageddon Wars or the Gog Wars. Understand those happened in the last 7 years, and we're nowhere near there now. As these things, contrived events, start working together, they can move the agenda faster. But we have to be patient with that. We can't get ahead of the chronology, because to be in the end time, to be in the last 7 years, you have to have the 10 kings, you have to have the universal religion, and you have to have Judah of the southern kingdom in the covenant land in Jerusalem and being permitted to do the sacrifice on a wing or extremity of the temple. And that's going to take a lot of upheaval to bring any of that about. And the globalists are pushing hard, and they get pushed back because it's not the ordained time for even to permit them to bring about their contrived end time and their counterfeit Armageddon, their counterfeit Messiah, their counterfeit false prophet. And well, it wouldn't be a counterfeit false, their counterfeit prophet, who is the false prophet, the counterfeit religion of the world. So we have to look at Bible chronology, but we have to be patient, and we don't want to jump ahead of it, and we don't want to get discouraged because it may not be happening quite the way that we want. But all the things have to line up, and it has to happen in a specific order. And my approach submits that Jesus gives us the chronology. So the chronology where we're at is we are in the fig tree generation, and we're in the sorrows. And that's where I would place us. But I would say we could have, a decade or more before we really start saying we can see the horizon point of the last 7 years coming.
Oh, really great points. And definitely a lot to think about there. Thank you very much for that answer. Move on to our next question that comes from Jaco van Birion. Sorry if I mispronounced that. Is there any proof outside of the Bible and the writings of Josephus Flavius for the existence of the Messiah?
It's a very, very good question, because I think Jocko is hearing some of the wedge arguments that the Masons and the Gnostics in Western society like to throw at us, and the seculars, is that Jesus is a figment of the imagination. There's no real history to it. And then, you can tell them, well, he's written of in the Bible. And they say, well, outside the Bible then. Then you say Josephus Flavius, and he's a historian that was hired by the Romans so that the Jewish history wouldn't be lost. And people say, well, is there anybody else? And what they're doing with this argument is the chase the rabbit argument. So when you answer a question, then they say, well, what about this? And so that's probably what's happened to Jocko here, is he said that there's these two, but then they say, well, who else has done it? And if you were to provide them another name, they would say, who else? So it's not one that you can win, and you're going to have to decide. You can't win because they'll just keep saying, well, give me another one, right? So, but I will provide some other names for people here, just so that people know that we can say that there are outside biblical sources to this. So the first one is Tacitus, and he wrote about Jesus, and also wrote about the tribulation of the saints in the early church. Pliny the Younger, a Roman politician, also documented this, Jesus. Another one would be a fellow by the name of Phlegon, and he was a slave who wrote the histories of his people and his time, which was in the time of Jesus. You have Lucian, who was a Greek satirist, a Greek writer, a Greek noble. He wrote about Jesus. You have Celsus, or Celsus, if you want to pronounce the C as hard. It's spelled Celsus, and he was a Roman philosopher. There was another fellow by the name of Mera bar Serapion, who was a prisoner awaiting execution, who was freed, who wrote about his experiences, and this was at the time of Jesus' crucifixion as well. And so another one is a Roman named Suetonius, Suetonius, and another one is Thallus. And there's probably others, but I'll guarantee you that when you present all of these names to the ones spreading misinformation and disinformation, they're going to say, well, who else again? But that's the list that I found. And I like to keep that sort of handy, because I can never remember all of those names. But there are way more than just Josephus. I think Josephus gives a flashing account. And he is targeted because they know most people don't go any deeper than Josephus. And then even if they recognize that Josephus has the account, then they say, well, that was just forged and corrupted by Christians later. There's no evidence of that. And again, they just throw these allegations out to try and get Christians flustered. And they should prove to us why he didn't exist. And then they may make, for me, a better argument. I would put a caution on that, because They will present false evidence that Jesus did exist, but he wasn't resurrected to heaven in the end time. So what that tells you is that they actually have evidence of Jesus living, and the Gnostics believe in him as a great teacher. And we also have all these Gnostic gospels that are out there. Many of them dug up in the Dead Sea Scrolls, whether or not they're Christian or they're not. Many of them are Gnostic. Some of them might be thought to be part of the canon, but let's just take the ones that might be sort of thought could have been part of the canon. Leave those out. Let's just talk about all of the Gnostic scriptures written at that time that talked about Jesus. There's a whole body of information that's out there outside the Bible and outside of Josephus.
There definitely is. Yeah, thank you very much for giving us that rundown and sharing all those sources. Next question comes from Facts Not Fiction. Do you know anything about cloning? Will the Antichrist be a clone? Finally, how do you clone an adult? For example, do you need to start the clone as a kid and speed up the aging process?
Well, I want to state for the record, I'm not a scientist, but I think these are questions that we need to be able to come to terms with. So cloning is, I think, a legitimate theory to how Antichrist comes about in the end time, and that he will be cloned from someone from the past. Just it would have to be that way to sort of satisfy the passage in Revelation 17 where Antichrist, the beast as he's called in that passage, is the one who once was, now is not, but will be again. So in isolation, you could look at that and saying it's either got to be somebody who comes up out of the abyss, as is stated there as well, but that could be a couple of meanings on that, and or it's a physical body that may have included in the past that has been cloned, let's say of Gilgamesh, for example, or of some famous Antichrist type figure like a Nimrod who may have ended up going to the sides of the abyss as part of the terrible ones, and the first post-Diluvian Antichrist figure, or it could be an antediluvian Nephilim who may have been an Antichrist figure. I mean, we don't know where they would get samplings to do this cloning effect that we see in those dinosaur movies where they clone the dinosaurs and put them on an island. The trouble is with cloning is it doesn't answer the spirit aspect. How does a counterfeit spirit get put in there? Because that spirit likely doesn't come from God. It's going to be a spirit that is going to be loyal to the fallen angels and to Satan. So that likely means this is going to be one that is born from the bloodlines, or a new Nephilim creature created in the generation of the end time, or it is a disembodied spirit that's going to go into a clone body to possess Antichrist. And Antichrist is going to have a mortal head wound. So it may be that the Antichrist actually isn't really alive, or if he is saved, that spirit is saved and that spirit didn't go to sleep, that you have a possession of Antichrist when he receives that mortal head wound that is healed by Elijah. And what's interesting about Elijah, I mean, the false Elijah is the word I should have said, the false prophet. Expect that they're going to counterfeit Elijah, or anticipate that, because the false prophet is going to rise during the time of Babylon and is going to make the way for Antichrist. And he wrought miracles, as Revelation 20 said, to raise the mythos of Antichrist, or will be doing this. And wrought means to lead the way, to make the way, just as Elijah will come back and make the way for Jesus in the end time. So they need a counterfeit Elijah for their counterfeit Antichrist. And if you look at some of the miracles that Elijah did through the power of the Holy Spirit and God, is he was able to bring fire down from the earth just as the false prophet does. And he actually was able to resurrect a child, as Jesus did as well. So expect a false Elijah who would fit into this whole sort of deadly wound Antichrist receives, and maybe he's not resurrecting him, but he's doing some sort of ritual that would permit this disembodied spirit that perhaps comes up out of the abyss to enter the body. So lots of different ways where that could happen with some of the details. So I tend to lean that he's more of a descendant, and then open up those possibilities of not only being possessed by demons or demons living in that body. And we know that that's going to be the case because in Revelation 16, you have not only the false prophet, not only Satan, but also Antichrist, who has demons come out of his mouth to go to the kings of the earth to do miracles. And I'm presuming these demons were the power behind the Antichrist and the false prophet to do these miracles to a certain extent, to bring the kings to Armageddon. And you could also translate that not as coming out, but commanding with their mouths through rituals and words and incantations the demons to do their bidding. So you could really look at the understanding that there's power being advanced to Antichrist, and also there's an avatara effect. So Antichrist in Revelation 13 is going to receive his power from the dragon. Now, you could understand that as Satan, or you could understand that perhaps as Azazel as he comes up out of the abyss, or you could also understand that as the 10-king empire of the beast empires he receives, because that's a dragon hydra or a leviathan with multi-heads that comes up out of the sea that's described in Revelation 12, 13, and 17. But also in 2 Thessalonians 2, Antichrist receives his power from Satan, who is the devil, who is the dragon, who is the serpent. So I think it's possible with Azazel. I think he does receive his power from the 10 kings. I think he will receive additional power from as an avatara of the avatar Satan, just as Satan entered into Judas to have the courage to continue to betray Jesus. So we know the avatara effect is possible by powerful angelic angels, just as Vishnu incarnated into Buddha to give him the wisdom to start Buddhism. And that's a typical thing that happens. And just as the New Age says Antichrist, the Christ consciousness will be an incarnation. So expect something like that, probably a combination of Satan and the demons that are providing the power. But I'm open because of the one that comes up out of the abyss that could be Azazel, or it could be a disembodied spirit that comes up from the abyss that's going to enter into Antichrist. So, and then it was, how do you clone an adult? Well, that's a very good question. That would be having angelic technology to be able to do that, to create the genes to either do some sort of rapid not aging, but just a rapid advancement of cellular structure and multiplication over a very short period of time to create that oiketerion. Angelic technology is more powerful than we can imagine. The thing they can't do is just create a spirit out of nowhere and create life out of nowhere. They can pass that counterfeit spirit on illegally, as what they did with the Nephilim and the Rephaim, but they can't create the spirit. And so this, if it is a clone thing, it's going to have an outside spirit in it.
Awesome. Thank you very much for all the answers so far. We're getting ready to go into break, and then we will pick it up on the other side.
I love motherhood more than I could have ever imagined. One of the most important things to me is nurturing a strong foundation in Yahusha's character in our children. That said, I made sheets that went over the fruits of the Spirit, the armor of God, the 10 Commandments, and creation days. Each day at breakfast, we would go over these and then read books like Cat in the Hat that just felt so void in meaning, but they loved the rhymes. I looked everywhere for rhyming biblical principles and couldn't find any. That's when I decided I would make them myself. Praise God, we now have our first book, Eliana and Ezra's Journey Through the Fruits of the Spirit, a first in a series. Every morning we now can continue to build strong principles even through rhymes, and I wanted to offer it to the babies in your life too. Please go to Sacred Word Publishing and search Fruits of the Spirit to get your copy. Or you can go to prophecyforchildren.com. Thank you so much.
As a bookstore for truth seekers, it's our goal to make ancient manuscripts which were once held captive by secretive institutions available for public consideration. In our generation, where wisdom has increased as Daniel the prophet foretold, we have access to many of the testimonies our early church brethren were persecuted for preserving. After being hidden for centuries, these manuscripts have been leaked from various sources throughout the earth, and it's our goal to gather these sources into printable form to make available for all who seek the ancient way. If you're looking to deepen your studies of the biblical narrative, find these ancient manuscripts and more at sacredwordpublishing.com. Your partnership with Sacred Word Publishing goes further than the publishing of ancient manuscripts and weekly video content.
You also make a huge impact across the earth in orphanages in Myanmar, India, Uganda, and Kenya.
Your support is crucial for the development of the ecclesia of real truth seekers.
We thank you for joining us in hosting Secrets Revealed, Momentary Zen, the Digital Readers Club, Ask Me Anything series, and other shows that have helped lead so many to the truth of salvation.
To become even more involved, please visit patreon.com/sacredwordpublishing, where you can partake in exclusive, interactive, patron-only content and help us continue shining the light of love in this darkened world.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the planet. Not giving up. Revolution Radio. All right. Thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
Ooh, let's be honest, all those cheers are for Brother Gary, who's joining us tonight. And welcome back, everybody. This is a continuation of the Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Gary Wayne. This is episode 50, and we're about halfway through our list of questions for tonight. Before we get into live questions from the chat over at youtube.com/ZenGarcia, if you have a question that you would like to add to the list, please write question in all capital letters and then write your question. That way I know it is for Brother Gary. So let's welcome back. Gary, are you there?
I am, and ready to go with the second half. I guess by the looks of it, I'll have to speed up my answers here a little bit.
Well, there are definitely some great questions, and we really appreciate the thorough answers. Before we do get back into the questions, could you please let us know where can people find more information on your awesome series, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy?
Yeah, the where you can get more information on that book is to go to my website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com. That's www.genesis6conspiracy.com. If you like some of the things that I'm saying, you want to dig into my book a little bit more, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters on that website. And if you wanted to buy the book, you can link over to the Buy Now page. Just click on the Buy Now page, and you can buy a signed copy from me. There's a US page, there's a Canadian page, and there's the rest of the world or the overseas page. So that's the best way to get a hold of me and to find out about the book. And if you wanted to get a hold of me on page 2, and I'm going to be working on making this more clear to have a contact the author icon, but where it is right now is you contact Gary Wayne for an interview on the media page. Click on that. That's my email address, genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. Again, with the number 6. And the book is also available on barnesandnoble.com, amazon.com, amazon.ca. I also have links off the website and the Buy Now page to those locations. Takes you right to Amazon and the book, and also to the Kindle edition. So the book is also available on most online bookstores. The new book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps to Define End-Time Prophecy, will also have a generous excerpt of all 84 chapters for that, and I'll be wanting to get that up. I've got that all done, and we'll be working with my website person here to post that so that you can get a feel for the book. And I will also make that available off the same website. It'll be available from the same sources. And I will also be offering bundling prices so that if you want to buy more than one book, and it doesn't matter whether or not it's one of each, and they're going to be priced at the same price, there'll be a discount for buying 2 books, and I'll have a few other bundling prices that's in there. And I will have, as soon as I have a firm date for the release, I will get that out. If you want to be notified when I get the firm date for the release and all the ways you can buy the book, get a hold of me at, I know I'm giving out a lot of emails, get a hold of me at Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2. That's Genesis 6 with the number 6. Conspiracy Part 2, the number 2 at gmail.com. You don't have to say anything. Just send me the email and I will return that email with all the information on how to buy the book and where to buy the book and how much it's going to be priced at the time. And I won't solicit after that, so it's not a pre-booking, but on that email, I will include how you could pre-book if you wanted, and I'll have that available through the website and probably some other postings through social media.
Excellent. Well, I definitely encourage everyone to check out that Awesome resource. And we'll jump back into the questions now. All right, this one comes from Files and XPM. Has the Messiah had his 1,000-year reign already during the Dark Ages?
That's part of an eschatology that I don't support. But it doesn't mean that the people who don't support that don't use the Bible and don't make a good case for why they believe that. Here's where I think that I run sort of amok with it, so to speak. And so the answer is no, the millennium hasn't happened yet. And I get there because there's just so many things that just haven't taken place. And somebody can say, well, they wiped out all of the records and then they replaced everything, I suppose, but it's unlikely. Because there's a simple word that's used, and some of the things that haven't, I'm going to get to that word in a second, but we haven't seen, the mark of the beast. We haven't seen the world all but destroyed. We haven't seen the universal religion. We haven't seen Armageddon. We haven't seen Jesus come. There's just this endless list of events that haven't happened yet. And I know some of them will say that this all happened in the time of Jesus, but it didn't happen in the time of Jesus. But that's not the question here. Because the millennium happens after Armageddon. And it's very important to understand that just as, Jesus talked about a chronological order of how things take place, with the word tota, there's a word that's used in the book of Revelation. I mean, I lost count how many times, but it's the word "and" as it's translated into English. And that's the Greek word that "and" comes from. G2532, it is kahi. And it means the same thing. In this application, then. It's the when. It's the chronological order. So in Revelation 20, you have this word that is "and" that is used throughout after Armageddon through the millennium. And so you get, again, a chronological order of events for the millennium, which is very important to keep in mind so that you're not sort of led astray by people leaving out inconvenient passages and things like that. So now, why is that important? Well, because when you get into the millennium, you get into the judgment at the end of that millennium. And of course, we haven't had the judgment yet. And so it says after Satan was released, and the word is "and" in Revelation 27, and the 1,000 years had expired, and Satan was loosed from prison, and then 28, and it's "and" again, and 29 is "and" again when you have this war, the second Gog-Magog war at the end of the millennium, and then after that, Satan is tossed into I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. He's tossed into the lake of fire, and it starts with that word "and" again. And then you go into the judgment. And so there's that chronological order where these things happen, and then the judgment takes place. And then you go into Revelation 21, you get, "and I saw a new heaven." There's nothing there to break up the story. It's a continuation of the story, and the word is "and" it's then, at that time, the when. And so this is a chronological order that we're being provided. And so if the millennium, as the question is asked, is over, then somehow there must be this significant piece of time that has been inserted that the Bible doesn't talk about. And so my answer to that is no. We haven't had the millennium happen. We haven't had Jesus's coming. It's designed to, in my opinion, it's designed to have people misled and to be deceived by the Antichrist when he comes and to miss the time of the rapture. It's all part of the plan of the great deceptions. And so one wants to be careful with Bible chronology. And I think you can't ignore these types of passages. And there's another question I know that's coming up down the road where I'll kind of finish this answer off that will sort of cement the whole piece to this, that we need to read the Bible literally, and we need to understand that this is the testimony of Jesus in Revelation 1 through 22, and that it will fit with his chronology because this is his testimony. And so Jesus is not going to conflict himself, and the Bible is not going to be conflicted. And any time where you're creating conflicts, and this type of approach does, the only way you eliminate those conflicts is to leave out the inconvenient passages. So, and I know in this argument, there's a tactic that's used a lot because I run into the preterists, and there's several different preterist divisions. I understand this. But it's, you answer one question and they say, what about this? You answer another question, and it's what I was saying earlier, and that's a red flag argument. They have to deal with those contradictions, I think, but everybody has a different approach.
I definitely appreciate that. Thorough answer again. Move on to the next one that comes from M. Ramirez. What are Gary's thoughts on the Kabbalion and its description of God as the All? Thanks, and God bless you guys.
Well, I think the Kabbalion is being true to its belief system. So I think it's totally appropriate that the Kabbalion would say that. And here's how I get there. The Kabbalion is Hermetic philosophy, and it's a study that comes out of the ancient Egyptian religion, which is the second major leg to polytheism in the world, with the Magi and Nimrod in Shinar after Babel being the first leg. And so you have these two main pillars, and this comes specifically out of the polytheism. This is the religion of Heliopolis. This is the religion that Moses actually was educated in and rejected when he converted. And so to have them call God as the all is perfect in their allegory. It's incorrect from a biblical perspective. It's wrong. But they believe in the all-seeing eye. And in the Kabbalion Hermetic philosophy, the all-seeing eye is a representation of their god, which is Satan. And you may see the all-seeing eye that's represented in Osiris and other gods, but they are an allegory for the true parent god, which is Satan, that sits above the council of the gods. And so it would be appropriate for the polytheists to say that their God, the God that heads their pantheon, the God that heads their assembly of gods, was the all-seeing eye. But he is not God, and he is not equivalent to God as they believe, but they make him as being all-seeing, just as God is all-seeing out of the Bible, and just as God is omnipresent, but he's also Alpha Omega. And I do not believe Satan is omnipresent. So it is just a creating of a mythos to deceive people and to seduce people that the terms that they use are accurate, but they're leading you in that seduction into polytheism. So one needs to be careful with these organizations. So Kabbalion is a Hermetic philosophy. Yes, they would call their God the All, as in the all-seeing eye.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that answer. Our next one comes from Mama Bear. Are the descendants of Magog also referred to as Scythians? Are royal Scythians vampiric?
Yeah, a couple of good questions in there. So in the Ezekiel War of 38 and 39, you have Gog of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech, and Meshech is the root word for the sort of the word Moscow receives one of its etymological roots. And that Scythians were the ones who settled into the Ukraine and much of Mongolia and much of Asia and created like the post-Diluvian Tartarian Empire versus the antediluvian antediluvian Tartarian Empire. And so these royal Scythians are the same as the Tuatha De Danann, and they're distinct from the dark-haired Aryans. There's 4 different groups of these Indo-Aryans after the flood, but they're all part of the same giant sort of civilization and creation. There might be a couple different creations with of these, but the Scythians are more connected to the Rephaim in terms of the hair color of being either red-haired or blonde-haired and hazel-eyed and blue-eyed after the flood. So the Scythians settled into the Ukraine area, and they established the Tartars and the which is connected again to the Tartarian Empire. These are Scythians. They established the first Tsars as their royal dynasty, which are the Putyanin bloodline that Putin says he receives his bloodline and his nobility and his name from through an intermarriage with his grandfather or great-grandfather in the Ukraine. And that Moscow was settled and established through Vladimir the Great of the Putyanin of the Scythians, whom Putin venerates today as Vladimir the Great. And so the descendants of Magog are in the book of Revelation, the book of Ezekiel, are the Scythians as the chief prince of Meshech, and they're part of that great alliance. And so we want to look in that direction, I think, in a careful sort of way and say, how is what is going on there today going to help create these 10 empires of the world? And how are those 5 toes being set up, as Daniel 2 talks about the 10 toes on 2 different legs, as we start to see with the Chinese, India, Russian, Persian, as in Iran, alliance starting to form. And I think we start to see that. So I think it's important to understand who the Scythians are and who Gog and Magog are, and Gog doesn't show up in the Bible. That name is a name of an antediluvian giant, and I'm pretty sure giants after the flood were named the same or named after some of the giants before the flood, like Gilgamesh, for example, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, 6th generation after the flood, and Gilgamesh being mentioned in the Book of Giants, which was before the flood. That's one sort of specific example. And so Gog is possibly one of these giants that comes up out of the abyss. And so I think we have to understand who these nations were as they're recorded in the Bible, because those root nations from the 70 nations are going to play a large part in the end time. Now, were the royal Scythians vampiric? Well, the royal Scythians, as Tuatha De Danann or the Datanu or the Horim or the Anakim, all part of the same groups here, they drank blood in their rituals, and they drank blood to give them more cognizance, a mental cognizance, and to extend life. So in that sense, they were ritualistic after the flood and drinking the blood, and before the flood when they tried to re-establish their immortality that was taken away. So the Royal Scythians, the Tuatha De Danann, you had migrations up the Danube River. And out of that migration, you have the Vlad the Impaler in the 1400s, 13 to 1400s with his father, as being known as Dracula. And Vlad the Impaler was a classic Celt, a classic noble Scythian, a classic royal Scythian, a classic Tuatha De Danann. He had red hair, hazel eyes, pale skin, and he took his genealogies back to Scythian tribe, the Agrathi, that they took their genealogy, they say, back to Hercules, son of Zeus and Alchemy. And he was a bloodline king who was educated in the mystery school in Vienna, mystery school of Solomon. So he is a royal adept as well. And he is believed not only in those rituals, but into a Vlad the Impaler, a very extraordinary, out of the ordinary way, was a consumer of blood. And so you have descendants of the Scythians who are carrying that on, who the great vampire tales that we have today were sort of reinvented with Dracula and Vlad the Impaler, and understand that Dracula means son of a dragon, and a dragon is a watcher in Greek, and a dragon is a seraphim angel, and the spiritu's offspring look just like them. And so you have these serpentine dragon vampires who drink blood, and it's all part of that cultural history that's passed down. So yes, the Scythians were blood drinkers. Whether or not you could create them into a demon, that's a whole different ball game. So I wouldn't quite get there, but they certainly acted monstrously.
A really interesting subject. Thank you very much for that answer. Next question comes from Caroline St. Clair. Is it just me, or is the Chronicles of Narnia reminiscent of SRA? What if the whole book is closer to reality and than fiction? I have been listening to accounts of satanic ritual abuse victims lately, and oddly reminds me of the book.
Interesting. Yeah. And I was, when I was reading that question, I wasn't sure what SRA was. I thought it must have to be either sexual ritual abuse or satanic ritual abuse. So, yeah, you have, particularly with the child aspect and going through the closet and a portal into this world where you have all of these spurious beings, whether or not it's like Aslan, who's an incarnation, as he would be, of Jesus in another world, as he's represented there, which is a copy off of Vishnu incarnating into Narashima, a lion demigod. You have satyrs that are in there. You have all sorts of bloodlines and things going. This is an occult series of books. And for people, if you're Christian and you're being shocked by what I'm saying, is that they wrote about their history and their belief system. They may have called themselves Christians. They may even believe they're Christians as in the Gnostic Christian that we talked about, and not in the deity of Jesus, but that Jesus was a teacher and a prophet, but mortal. And they never denounced these writings of the occult. And so I have a 6-part series on Tolkien and Lewis if people want to dig deeper into it. But I would submit that this is, it is occult writings. And within the secret societies, and particularly in the bloodline upper organizations of adepts, and purebloods, you have a lot of ritual abuse and sexual abuse, and particularly with children and the kidnapping of children, as well as the drinking of blood that we were just talking about, from the sources that I've talked to, and they are very credible sources from the inside, and people who did battle with them on an ongoing basis. And some of them still do, that where I got this information from. And so I think there is a lot of connections there that are undeniable. So I think they tell a wonderful sort of story if you don't dig into who the characters are or what the meanings are. So I think one ought to be careful with that. I'm not so sure I'd go quite to the point where it's being overtly in terms of satanic ritual abuse, but I can see how somebody would get there with some of the things and the scenes and the depictions that are in there. So, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't read some of this literature to your children. You just should be doing your job as a parent and a Christian, and underlying that some of these things aren't Christian, and this is what other religions believe, and educate them so that they're better prepared. So I don't cross over that sort of line and say don't read it. I could easily get there, but I'm not in favor of censorship, because that is a double-edged sword. So, but what I would advise is that if you are reading this material or letting your children read it, that you have conversations with them, and that give them the proper context.
Yeah, definitely very good points. And thank you very much. Next question, interesting one, comes from Holistic Thinking. Is the God of the Bible Anunnaki?
That's a good question, and it's one of the things that is out there in a lot of different belief systems, and even within the ancient alien mythos, they would sort of lump God in there with the Anunnaki. They may not raise them to a God level, but to an alien Anunnaki, just as in the mythos today you have the Anunnaki aliens that are talking to the world governments. So whether or not they're talking to watcher angels that have rebelled or their spurious offspring, hard to say. I'm not in on those meetings, but I do know Anunnaki were known as watchers. And so are their spurious offspring known as watchers. So I think with holistic thinking, she would be looking at the watcher gods. And they were also known as Agigi as well, which goes back to the Sumerian word for eye and to watch. So it's all sort of embedded into that meaning. And so polytheists say that God is an Anunnaki. He is a watcher. And specifically the Gnostics would place the God of the Bible in with the 12 archons that were created by Sophia, which was this female mother goddess that we're going to see a lot more of as we get closer to the end time, I think, particularly with the rise of Babylon. And names like that, as there's a representative of Sophia in all the other polytheist religions. And that she created with this nebulous life force of the universe, the 12 archons, and that the God of the Bible would be in there, and he went rogue. And they believe that Satan is the equal of God, because Satan, not known as Satan by the polytheists, he would have several different names. Lucifer is one that the Gnostics and the Masons like, or the great architect of the universe, that is also known in Mithraism and in Zoroastrianism, and or Halel, as we might understand that name coming out of Isaiah 14:12 for the Hebrew word. But God is not one of those archons. God is Alpha Omega. God is greater than all of this. Sophia is the mother of God in that aspect. And expect that again to be part of the religion. Sophia is the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of knowledge in Greek history and in Gnosticism. So when you see philosophy, that's the love of Sophia, in its meaning the love of wisdom. It's the theology of the sciences that were developed. Not that knowledge is bad, it's how they were developed and how they're being used, and they're designed to lead people away from God. All of this thinking is designed to lead people away from God. And again, we need to understand, and we also need to be respectful that other people believe differently than we do as Christians, but we need to know their terms so that they can't drive wedges within our faith. They have their time. As Christians, we need to be patient, and that time is short. I think that these other belief systems have, but we need to be aware of their belief systems and their terms and how they do those equating and doctrinal equations designed to lower and wedge our faith and lead us away from God. It's all designed to do that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. You know, I think many people have probably considered that, especially in the New Age. People who are coming out of the New Age, who are taught by the whole Scientology system of the world about the whole ancient alien theory. That's such a popular one. But yeah, thank you for clearing that one up. Our next question comes from April Mueller. Where does the idea of the spirit animals come from? There are angels that have animal features as well as Nephilim mixed animal creatures. Are there good and evil animal beings?
Well, they'll portray themselves as good and evil in the physical world. I think we have to be understanding that there may be different faces to some of the orders of the angels. We're not really given all of those looks. Certainly in the cherubim and the Ophanium, we get some different animal looks, and the seraphim with the serpent-faced angels. One might deduce that some of the other angels, other than archangels, would have a face of other beings. And certainly when we look at, let's say, the Ogdoad gods in the Egyptian pantheon, they have a lot of reptilians in there, but they have a few other ones. But, you know, we have different animal faces associated with the gods. And with the cherubim, if they took a physical form, as angels can do, then they would have taken a single form. So they would have the face of a human, probably a dark-haired human. And they would have a face individually as a lion. They would have a face individually as a bull or an ox. And they would have a face of an eagle or a falcon. And we see that when the Anunnaki show up with the face of a dark-haired human and in identical reliefs, only this time with a eagle's face or a falcon face or a bird face. So we need to be aware of that. We also know they have changeling capabilities. So Zeus, for example, in polytheism took the form of a wolf. So that part is part of the mix. I think loyal angels don't take these physical forms except on the authority of God, and typically they would take that in the shape of a human, as we're shown biblically, but we're not shown biblically that a loyal angel couldn't take another form, and who knows, he possibly could. I just don't know why. A loyal angel would need to do that. In polytheism, you have the white hats and the dark hats. So within it, you have those that look after humankind and those who try to destroy humankind. They're all trying to destroy humankind. They're just doing it in a different sort of tactic. You have black magic, you have white magic. So you have good Nephilim, you have evil Nephilim, but they all worship the same pantheon of gods. They have the same agenda. So you could have an animal creature that has as was taken the form of a god that is doing either good or evil for humankind. But if they're doing that, I don't think they've got those people's good future in mind. Now, there's one other possibility here as well, is that disembodied spirits that aren't in the abyss, that aren't in Sheol. And according to polytheist doctrine, they have ones through these rituals that they can be paraded and be with their gods in Sheol. But we also have these disembodied spirits, which they also recognize not all of the spirits of the Nephilim and the Rephaim made it to their heaven. And they possess humans so that they can have a physical oiketerion, a body to interact and rest in. And they suppress the host. We also see in the Bible that they could take, as in the time of Jesus, where Jesus expels legion and they go into this herd of pigs. So they can take a physical oiketerion in an animal. How rewarding that is, I don't know. Can they speak? I don't know. I certainly know that an angel in a changeling capability can speak. I don't know whether or not a demon can make an animal speak or not. So that's the only part where I'm not real clear, but be aware that demons might have that capability, or some very powerful demons do. So I would be very careful of any animal that is a spirit guide or anything like that. It's not coming from God, in my opinion. I might be wrong on that, but I don't believe so.
Yeah, really interesting concept for sure. Next question comes from Benjamin Curry. Is the Revelation 12 sign in the stars happening again? And what does that mean compared to 2017?
I think it means the same as 2017. Nothing, I say that tongue in cheek, but it's astrology. They're using astronomy to create astrology, and you're going to see these types of formations form over and over in the celestial processions. So they're going to use these signs even more as we get into the end time. But Christians, we ought not to be looking at astrology and saying those are things that will affect us. They do not. There will be signs in the end time, but there will be different kinds of signs that aren't astrology. We won't have to look on some sort of graph thing on a piece of paper with an image drawn over it to see it. We're going to see those signs, and they will be unmistakable, I think. So just as a lot of people said that Revelation 12 sign was the time of rapture in 2017, it doesn't fit properly with where we are in the chronology of end time events. And Revelation 12 represents, with the woman, represents Israel and the Messiah's son, and then Israel fleeing Antichrist and Satan at the midpoint. So you could say rapture happens at the midpoint. So that sign that we need to be aware of is the timing of rapture, except that you can't, it doesn't say that that sign is for rapture, and that you can't get ahead of chronological events. And so we haven't even started the last 7 years yet. So I would ignore the astrology. I would look for true signs, and those true signs are going to come from, I think, and explained to us by the two witnesses and by the 144,000 in the first 3.5 years, not by occultists.
Yeah, definitely some fishy with all that astrology over there. Thank you for clearing that one up. And let's see, I think that was the final question.
No, we have a couple more.
Oh, we have a couple more. I guess I don't have that added to the slideshow, so I'll try to get that fixed up, and I'll go ahead and present the question here. From Brian Tucker, did Jesus returned during Tartaria, the Millennial Kingdom. Is this the short season now? I think you answered that one.
Yeah, and this is a part that I reserved for why one of the reasons why I don't buy into the preterist version of the millennium has already happened, and we're in this short season, as a lot of people will say, or little season. In the King James Version Bible, you're going to get that passage in Revelation 23. That's 20, verse 3. And the word season comes from G5550, chronos is the Greek word for that. And it means an interval period, a pause or delay, or a short sort of period. So if we are in that, you can't have hundreds of years going through. This is a short period by its definition. And you have that chronological order with that word kahi that we talked about, where the events are unfolding. So there's no way Satan would be permitted hundreds and hundreds of years or thousands of years, as some people might suggest, or at least 1,000 years, as some people suggest. And I'm not saying Brian is suggesting any of that, but we hear this thing about the short season that we're in. Well, we do get one application that shows up in the Bible other than Revelation 20, verse 3, where it says Satan is released for a little season at the end of the millennium. That comes in Revelation 6:12, and it's in a passage that is talking about the first fruits. So the resurrection sequence is Christ, the first fruits, and then when he comes, those who died in him and those who are still alive. There are other resurrections as we go through, but that's the main cycle of resurrections. Of course, we have the ones of the mark of the beast, and we also have the Israel resurrection in Ezekiel 37, and that's the first resurrection. The second resurrection is for all others at the end of the millennium, the end of Revelation 20, some to everlasting life, one presumes, and most to the second death. So in Revelation 6, we have these martyrs who have died for the testimony of Jesus, who are said to be patient for those to be killed like them that will come out of the Great Tribulation, as Revelation 7 talks about. And that's the affliction, thlipses, for tribulation, whether it's affliction in Matthew 24, 7-8, or tribulation in Revelation 7 or 2:10, or tribulation as in the Great Tribulation in Matthew 21, which is the Surah, the last 3.5 years, versus the tribulation of the saints in Revelation 7. And we know thlipses is also translated as affliction, as it is in Matthew 24, 7-8, and in the parallel verse with the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24, 21, for the Great Tribulation not seen since creation, happens in Mark 13, gives the same description, except it uses the word affliction for the same purpose as tribulation. So we don't get perfect consistency on the translation there, but understand this is the tribulation that the ones in Revelation 6 are to wait for, more first fruits. And the 144,000 are shown in Revelation 14 at the midpoint of the last 7 years as martyrs in heaven, just as the two witnesses are killed and their commission is 3.5 years. And so the tribulation of the saints ends at the midpoint. The Great Tribulation takes, and the time of Jacob's trouble starts at the midpoint for the last 3.5 years. And those saints in Revelation 6, the first of the martyrs, the first of the ones to die for the testimony of Jesus, are told to wait for a short season. The same words. So the maximum, according to biblical definition, that you could extend to the time that Satan is released for would be 3.5 years, not centuries. And so that just doesn't seem to fit. So I like to define everything within the Bible. I know other approaches do not, but I do. And so, no, I do not think that the Millennium Kingdom is part of this short. I don't not believe that Jesus returned during Tartaria. Uh, and millennium was before that, because it just doesn't fit. 3.5 years is just not enough time for what we have. I've lived longer than 3.5 years, so that just doesn't fit whatsoever. And again, I say that tongue in cheek. So I like to have things fit, and I like to have things defined within the Bible, and I generally find everything is. And so I would say no to that.
Right on. All right. Well, this moves us to the final question from the pre-made list for tonight. Again, we are taking questions from the live stream chat. If we don't get to the live stream questions tonight, we will roll them over to become the pre-made list for next month's Ask Me Anything. This last one comes from Justin. What are your thoughts on the Ezekiel 38 alliance, and why does it seem to leave out the Western Empire? Is the Western Alliance considered an alliance with Israel in this prophecy, and will they come to fight for Israel at Armageddon?
Well, I think Justin has asked a terrific question there, I must say. If we look at that alliance in Ezekiel 38, it doesn't present, for me, in terms of my understanding of eschatology, all of the 10 empires that would be there in the world. And all of the 10 empires don't show up together, all the 10 kings and their leaders, until Armageddon, when those 10 kings are answering to Antichrist in the last 3.5 years, the time of Jacob's trouble. And so we only get part of the geopolitical 10 empires there. I think we see Persia there. We see the Russian alliance there. And when we look at Persia, that may include India, because the Aryans that settled into Persia to form the bloodline kings of the Achaemenid kings also settled into the Indus Valley, and that's why Zoroastrianism has the same names of gods. They're transliterated in the spelling just slightly different, as the gods in Hinduism. And you just have two different types of Indo-Aryan languages that are very closely related, separating the two. So, but we don't see all of the 10 kings, and there is 2 legs on Daniel 2 with 10 toes of 10 kings, and we don't really see any of the Western alliance there. That is, if you could use some of the terms, maybe part of the Southern Alliance, as that alliance goes into North Africa, but you don't get North America there. You might get maybe Gomer as part of Europe there, and I think that is Germany, and I think they're going over to the Ezekiel alliance, and they will do that because they have to, just as India buys their energy from Russia if we are in the fig tree generation, and Germany will be forced to do that. And Turkey is Beth Tagarma. They're part of NATO as well, but they're working with the Russians, they're working with the Iranians, the Persians now as well. So I would not be surprised to see the European community split, with Germany leading a central one, and that one kind of aligning itself with Russia. You don't see China in that war either. So, but China will be there in support as they are right now. China will be the part of the kings of the East at Armageddon, but they're not shown in the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war. And we know this is not Armageddon because you have the second Exodus that is talked about in Ezekiel 39 that happens after the destruction of the Magog war, and in Ezekiel 38 it's in the latter days, so it's different than the Gog war in at the end of the millennium. So somebody has to be defending Israel in the covenant. And I think that's the Western nations. And I think that Antichrist will take credit for winning the war. I think God will have a lot to do with it because God stands and fights for Israel in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And I think that's the Joel 1 and 2 war. And I also think it's the Revelation 9 war. And Antichrist will take credit as his Armageddon, and then he will move into later, maybe 6 months later, he'll move into Jerusalem and crown himself as king. So we do get in Daniel 11:30. And you go from about verse 21 in Daniel 11 to about verse 32, as I recall. You're going to go. You're going to see the events of the last 7 years on both halves. You get the abomination that's going to show up in Daniel 11 as well. That splits the two sides of the events for your timing as you're trying to understand that. So if you understand that, then there's a passage that happens before the abomination in Daniel 11, where it says the ships of Chittim will resist Antichrist. And there's also a passage in there that is talking about attached to the ships of Chittim that will come against Antichrist. Is there's going to be a member of the Holy Covenant that is going to be destroyed. And that's probably part of the Western Alliance and the ships of the West, as you would understand that. And of course, you have the great navy of the U.S. And I think the U.S. and Britain will either be, they may actually be together, as you start to see things today going forward. They may form sort of that great commonwealth of King James for the end time. Just a speculation that I have. And so you also have in Daniel 11:22 for a mentioning of the covenant is you have the arms of a great army being destroyed. And I would suggest that I mixed up the chronology there when I was talking about 11:30 with the ships of Chittim. That's after the abomination. I'm sorry I said that. And so I think that's the remnant of the Western Alliance. I think that is part of the ones that will still have power and the ships that are going to resist the Antichrist, and that happens after. In 11:22, before the abomination, you have a great army that is destroyed before Antichrist. And I think that's the Gog War. And you have a prince of the covenant that's destroyed or partially destroyed. And I think that might be part of the Western Alliance and part of the ones that are protecting Israel. And then you have another passage in the book of Isaiah that might be very specific for the U.S. And I think it sort of intertwines in there that we do get some of the West that's being talked about, but you have this destruction that might be a part of this great war. And you can imagine that they would want to take those loyal to Israel out as part of marching in on that war. So we have a passage in Isaiah 18 that might reflect the U.S. And it's the famous woe to the land shadowing with wings and beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, so somewhere in the further west. And this is a very powerful nation, the time of the trumpets and the time of the harvest. And this is a destruction of that nation in that time. And so I think if people read that, you're going to see a number of parallels that would be like the U.S., because the U.S. is going to have a significant level of power no matter what happens with the formation of 10 kings, would probably be a very powerful member of the 10 kings and would probably still be defending Israel. And this is a country that sends ambassadors by the sea and vessels all over the world, and it has many rivers. And I
All
think
right.
it's probably talking about end time U.S.
Thank you so much, Brother Gary, for joining. And thank you, everybody, for joining tonight for this awesome Ask Me Anything. We look forward to next month to picking up all the live questions that we weren't able to get to tonight. Thank you so much again, Brother Gary, for your time. And make sure everybody joins Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis6conspiracy.com. Check that out. And we'll see you later. Have a great night. Shalom.